Now we're going to talk about storytelling. At the end of the day, PMs are storytellers. What exactly is storytelling? Well, it's a powerful tool that you can use to create more tangible narratives. Storytelling is a tool that allows you to express your vision and thoughts through more compelling, tangible narratives. And it makes it easier for people to understand and relate to what you're explaining. Storytelling explains what and why. This is because the story explains not just what happens, but why it's happening as well. Stories explain the rationale behind what's going on. This provides the audience with deeper insight and understanding around motives. Stories also have an emotional element. When you tell a story, the audience builds an attachment to characters in that story. This creates more of an emotional response and gets the audience invested in the outcome of the story. And stories can also be exciting. And when you get people excited about solving the problem, they're really going to care about solving the problem and be invested in it. And lastly, storytelling is a core role of being a PM. You'll need to tell stories all the time, whether it's explaining your roadmap to leadership and the larger company, or building user stories for the design and engineering team to execute against. Stories are a great way to inspire the team and get everyone excited. So now let's talk a little bit about the elements that go into a story. First, you have the hero. This is your user, who they are, what they care about, their background. And then there's a goal. This is what the hero is trying to accomplish. But before they can achieve their goal, they encounter a villain or a problem that's preventing the hero from getting to where they're trying to go. And that's where the sidekick comes in to help. The sidekick in most cases is going to be your product. And then lastly, you have the plot, which describes how the hero and the sidekick defeat the villain and achieve their goal. So what else goes into crafting a story? Well, you're going to want to start with the big picture. It's important to start with the big picture and provide context. You'll want to make sure that you understand who your audience is and what they care about. You'll also want to think about how you want them to feel at the end of the story and what actions you want them to take, if any. With that in mind, then you'll want to describe the problem or the conflict. It's usually helpful to start by explaining how we got here and why did this problem arise in the first place. You can also touch on why this is an important problem to solve and what's currently preventing your user from reaching their goal. Then comes the plot for how to get to resolution. You want to make sure to include enough imagery and detail so that the audience gets a mental image in their mind. The more personal you can make it, the better. How does your product help the user to reach their goal? And how is that any better than other options that are available? And then lastly, you'll want to talk about the impact and the conclusion. How was the problem ultimately solved? And why does it matter that it was solved? And what does it mean for the user? So now I'm going to share a few tips that you should keep in mind when you're crafting a story. First and foremost, you want to keep it simple. The simpler your message is, the more that it will get across to your audience. After you've created your story, one of the things that you can do is you can ask yourself how you would tell the same story in just half the time. That's a really great way to go through and ask yourself and find out if you actually need every single element that you've created so far. You also want to make your story memorable. You want people to be able to remember the important parts of your story. And a really great way to do this is by making it more personal and relatable, and by having emotional moments that people might have experienced themselves. Another thing that you can do with a story is you can show why things matter rather than telling or explaining. You don't want to explain what your product does in detail, but you can show what it does and you can show its impact. You can show how people would use it and why they're using it. Potentially, this is also a point where you can include mocks or demos of your product as well. Another thing that's super important is practice. Practice, practice, practice. You should be able to tell the story without having to refer to any notes. This doesn't mean that you've memorized it word by word though. So we just talked a little bit about storytelling, what it is and why it matters, and how you can create stories as well.